you. Thanks so much to RE and to the rest of RE-PEAT and everybody for joining us this evening. It's great to see you all. And I was so happy when RE-PEAT decided to partner with me on this event, and it was sort of came about as part of my fellowship with the Leverhulme Trust, which is called Creative Writing and Climate Change, Developing a New Wetlands Literature. So as part of that work, I've been looking at the potential for creative writing to play a role in mitigating climate change, and looking at what a wetlands literature that had both literary and activist merits might look like, and who is included in these literary representations of wetlands. So as part of that work, I've been exploring a large number of peat bogs through field work and researching a book to promote more engagement with wetlands. And I've been lucky enough to work with a number of scientists, mostly women, during the field work. And I think as we look at the way that wetlands are used and can be used in the future, the potential of paludiculture, so wetland farming, a focus on women's work is really helpful. So it was stated at a UN Commission on the status of rural water in the sector. And so I've been particularly interested in women living and working with wetlands because their stories are frequently missing, and there is scant information in the archival records that have tended to focus on the activities of male farmers in the household. And so then I moved from that kind of broad research into looking at my own experiences in wetlands and with plants that inhabit them, and following on from a British Academy small grant on moss, wetlands and women, I looked more at mosses, and I have been compiling what I've been thinking of as a poet's field guide to mosses. And they have appeared, a couple of these poems, in RE-PEAT events before, I think. But I will also share another one in a moment just to finish my little intro. But what I wanted to do at this stage with the research was really to open it back out to other women and provide a space for a range of women's experiences in and with wetlands. So I'm really delighted that the speakers joining us today were willing to share their time and work with us. So the introductions, I think bios will come later, but I know we have Kairani Baraka, Shereen Mack, Pontia, and I'm hoping Camila Marambia to join with us also. And welcome to those speakers. And I shall leave with a little poem called Little Peach. And I'll just mention that it's also been published in Willow Herb Review, which is the lovely publication run by Jessica J. Lee. Little Peach, Sphagnum palustra, blunt-leaved bog moss. Baby's breath, lamb's bleat, little peach, sleek of pulp and feet, cream, loud pealing of bells, dream, pillows of plants gleam the grass together, stitch, branches, tether leaves, no sleeves, a narrow taper, candles breaking in the grass, shrink of throat and heart won't pass your ditch-ripe cheeks, your pastel heat. Palustra is a marsh, but if you're classed by where you come from, you're the edge that meets the soften, you're the coughing of blossom giving way to wood, woven leaves, no sleeves, a shallow. Pink is an afterthought, peach is the leaf you brought, your fleshy soft and outer, your hard and nutless butter, nothing in that isn't soft, nothing out that isn't soft, nothing in that isn't soft, nothing out that isn't soft. Stitch a sunset using ditches, stitch a life using peaches, see it grow. In the marshes no one knows what patterns, peak, little quilt of heat, fingertips dust sleep, palustra, palustra, creeps along the marrow, weaving pinks of mallow in the flushes, butter, blushes. Thank you and welcome all.
Thank you, Elizabeth Jane, that was beautiful. I think then we can move on to our first speaker, of tonight. Oka, you can take the floor. Oka is a writer and artist from Jakarta, whose work is centered around disability justice as anti-colonial praxis and environmental justice. And this work has been presented internationally. She's also got an impressive list of honors. She's been modern poetry and translational inaugural poet in residence. She's also a UNFPA Indonesian Young Leader Driving Societal Change. Also an art forum must-see, UK Associate Artist at Delphina Foundation, and is also an Associate Artist at the National Centre for Writing in the UK. Oka's work includes being an author, co-editor, and an illustrator for several books, and her latest book is Ultimatum Orangutan, which centers anti-colonialism as central to environmental justice. And this book was also shortlisted for the Barbellion Prize. So Oka, please, thank you.
Thank you so much, Bethany, and everyone at RE-PEAT. And thank you so much, Elizabeth Jane, for that beautiful writing. You should also check out Elizabeth Jane Burnett's book of Sea, which I enjoyed. And thank you to my fellow speakers, Pantea, Sheree, and hopefully Camilla as well. So I am just going to share my screen. All right, is that working?
Yes. Yeah, looks great.
Okay, brilliant. All right, so the title of this presentation is not so subtly, Lahan Gambut untuk Selamanya, or Peatlands Forever. So what you see is an image of a road running through drained and burned peatlands. What do Indonesian peatlands have to do with not just myself as an Indonesian person who identifies as Indigenous, but literally everyone here today in the Zoom? So Indonesia is home to around 14 million hectares of peatlands, and that is approximately 23% of the world's total tropical peatlands. And to illustrate the dangers of peat fires, in 2015, peat fires in toxic haze resulted in the hospitalization of more than 500,000 people. That's more than 500,000 people hospitalized due to acute respiratory infections, and it killed nearly 100,000 people, if I'm not mistaken, including many children. And it's funny, I recently was introduced to a journalist who said, a German journalist who said, after reading some of my books on environmental justice in Indonesia, he said, oh, I covered those fires that was there, but I only covered orangutan extinction angle. I didn't cover anything about human deaths. I didn't cover what he said, the social justice angle. And to me, it was really painful to hear that, because this was literally a genocide. I don't think enough people think of environmental violence as violence, and the resulting deaths and hospitalizations from peat fires as disablements. And I try and frame everything as a disabled woman from a disability justice perspective. And as something that contributes to a lot of deaths. And I think that not a lot of people know how important peatlands are in relation to our day-to-day lives. I live in London, and there are people here connected on a molecular level to Indonesian peatlands every day. So Indonesian peatlands cover 20.6 million hectares. So that's around 10.8% of the national landmass. And some people have said to me, oh, Indonesia is like a small island nation, right? No, it's actually the fourth largest nation in the world by population. We've got around 275 million people there, and we have the largest shoreline in the world. We have over 17,000 islands and a lot of peatland as a result. But forest clearing and drainage for agriculture of these peatlands, especially for palm oil plantations, have severely degraded a lot of these peat swamps, right? So because of these peat fires and this clearing of peatland to make way for palm oil plantations, which Indonesia is the largest palm oil producer in the world, and literally half of everything that you, in whatever country you are in, literally half of everything you buy in supermarkets contains palm oil. Whether or not it's listed as palm oil, there's literally dozens of sort of like, it can be cocoa palmitrate something else, or cocoa palmiate, or there's so many names for palm oil that are not palm oil. But basically, it's in our shampoos, it's in our hair conditioner, it's in our soap, it's in our it's in our toothpaste, it's in our detergent, It's in our foods, it's in our biscuits, and it's chocolates, everything. And I have a lot of us have a real issue with that. So because of these emissions clearing peatlands, this makes Indonesia the third largest emitter of CO2. So after United States and China, it's Indonesia. And a large part of that is because of the clearing of these peatlands. So the government of Indonesia has also done programs like the Transmigrancy Program. And that program is basically where, so Java is the most populated island, and Indonesia, the most densely populated island. And basically there's this horrible program amongst many horrible programs of the Suharto dictatorship, where people from Java were asked to basically colonize other islands in order to like spread out the population distribution. But obviously this is terrible for the environment. So there's a lot going on there. I try and express my anger at what is going on through art and writing. This is my first book, Indigenous Species, which Tilted Access Press kindly took a chance on. So here is a sample illustration from that book. So this was published in 2016, and as mentioned, the 2015 genocidal forest fires and peat fires had just happened. And I come from a family of a real environmental justice background, so I grew up with a lot of stress about, you know, how things are being reported inaccurately, how people don't understand the risk, how people don't care about these deaths, etc. But I always knew that I wanted to create a book where there was, as described here, there's an illustration of a lipstick made of rainforest against a, you know, a black text, bright blue background, and an abstract and traditional print river fire. So I'm just going to read from this. It's Indigenous Species is one long poem. It's a long epic poem about an Indigenous girl who is kidnapped and taken on a riverboat, and she's trying to escape, and she's also talking about all the environmental destruction around her. So she says, "I bet you from the raucous machinery I'm hearing and the smell of rashness that this is where the grease deals are siphoned into miners' food, and where they're packing down eons of intricacies and strength from the forest to molecular form on a woman's lipstick bottle in Iowa," because palm oil is also in the vast majority of cosmetics, almost all cosmetics. Also, I forgot to self-describe myself. Apologies. I'm an Indonesian woman, brown skin, short hair. I'm on a gray sofa. I'm wearing a black kabaya with a floral motif, and I have one long, dangly brass earring. So a lot of my work centers around Indigenous understandings of the Anthropocene, which is very different from sort of white male understandings of the Anthropocene, sort of westernized understandings of the Anthropocene. So Heather Davis and Indigenous scholar Zoe S. Todd wrote in The Importance of a Date or Decolonizing the Anthropocene, which I quote in my book, Ultimatum Orangutan, and I'll be reading from that book at the end. They say that this is not something that they themselves came up with. They recognize that they, you know, take from a lot of Indigenous cultures around the world. We believe this. The Anthropocene is not a new event, but is rather the continuation of practices of dispossession and genocide, coupled with a literal transformation of the environment that have been at work for the last 500 years, aka European colonialism. Further, the Anthropocene continues a logic of the universal, which is structured to sever the relations between mind, body, and land, as though those things are separate. Whereas, you know, Indonesia is home to over 700 languages and cultures, and all of these Indigenous cultures, we have relationships between mind, body, and land that cannot be severed, right? So this is an artificial severing. And I see that in this concept of nature and how we're expected to make about nature. We're expected to write quote unquote nature poetry, or, you know, this colonizing ideas of what nature and art about it should be. So the Yoruba philosopher Bayu Akomolafe says, "What we rudely call nature today does not even have a name in Yoruba culture, because there was no distinction between us and the goings on around us. Mountains could be consulted, trees could have privileges. In Western discourse, there's a clear distinction between man and nature." And it says Akomolafe is among post-colonial thinkers, pointing out the increasing dysfunction of this worldview. I would like to posit that every Indigenous child around the world is such a thinker and philosopher, because they do not adhere to this understanding of nature as separate from man, which overwhelmingly shapes climate policy, right? And climate understandings and what's fun for climate science. Here, trigger warning. I want to say that a lot of my frustration with how, issues regarding peatlands and quote unquote nature and Indonesia is a lot to do with sort of this very top-down attitude of these global quote unquote, environmental organizations coming into a lot of countries and actually causing literal harms. So in around 2019, I think BuzzFeed News reported that the World Wildlife Fund funds guards who have tortured and killed people, including sexual assaulting women. And then there's a quotes underneath from the Guardian update on that report, which said that they were cleared, WWF was cleared of any complicity in court. However, a lot of other organizations, including Survival International, said that that report that cleared blame sought to shift blame away from them. And the report itself said that they knew about the alleged abuses by these rangers, and they failed to take effective steps to prevent, respond to, and remedy these alleged abuses. And they passed this blame onto government rangers. But these rangers are funded and trained by WWF. Why does this matter with regards to peatlands? Why does this matter with regards to quote unquote nature and indigenous peoples? Every single national park in the United States is built on stolen land and is the result of genocide, right? And the concept of national parks around the world, after the sort of nation state breakup of the the colonial sphere into all these nation states, is continuing to be based on the displacement of indigenous peoples. But indigenous peoples, and this is an indisputable fact, the UN says it, but even if the UN did not say it, it would be true. Indigenous peoples are the #1 caretakers of natural lands. We have no separation between mind, body, and land. Like I'm Minang is one of my cultures, and we believe that tigers, we call them inyak, which is the word for grandparent, because we believe that that is the form that our ancestors come back to Earth as tigers, right? So I cannot think about tiger extinction as something that is also not spiritual and literally related to my family. Like these are my literal ancestors, right? And yet, we are all asked to go along with a very top-down attitude that sees indigenous peoples as ignorant, as our rights as unimportant, and the rights that we naturally confer to what is called nature, quote unquote, right? That we naturally confer as part of our cultures as irrelevant, as primitive, etc. Another way that this sort of Western attitudes towards peatland is dangerous is actually, I'm quoting here from Greenpeace UK. Having put down the climate denial playbook, many oil and gas firms have reached for the greenwash spray gun, but the aim is pretty much the same: delay or avoid action to avert catastrophic climate change. And carbon offsetting has become the most popular and sophisticated form of greenwash around. It could work in theory, but in practice, it's riddled with flaws. What happens in Indonesia, and if you'd like, I can send you many articles about this from Manga Bay and other reputable sources. So a lot of companies will say, okay, well, we can continue polluting. Companies like Shell, companies like, like all these oil and gas companies and mining companies that have caused environmental crisis and climate crisis in the first place, because they're allowed to, built on these uneven power relations caused by European colonialism, right? To go into lands and create, the world's largest gold mine is in Indonesia. Again, Indonesia's largest palm oil producer, etc. To say we can pollute over here because we're carbon offsetting over there. And what it is sort of just jiggling around these pieces. And what it does is actually allows multinational corporations to buy rainforest, which is a terrible idea. And oftentimes people will say, oh, but it's sustainable palm oil. A lot of what is sustainable, I don't believe there can be sustainable palm oil, because a lot of what passes for sustainable palm oil is corporations that have bought existing palm oil plantations on peatlands, and they say, we didn't cause any deforestation, because the deforestation was caused by the company before them that cleared away the peatlands and created this palm oil plantation. And this is also why at environmental events, when people say, we just plant trees. The trees planted in palm oil plantations are literally deadly. They're deadly to the environment and to people. So think about which trees you're planting. I never want to say just plant trees, because the planting of trees is a big part of this issue. Trees in plantations for palm oil. And this is really important for where I live right now, London and Europe in general, because at this moment in time, the UK Chancellor Rishi Sunak is aiming to make London the global hub for the trade of voluntary carbon offsets, which is a flawed system. I'm going to end by reading from my latest book, Ultimatum Orangutan, or Ultimatum Orangutan, which is it's a bilingual title. So, dalam bahasa Indonesia, ultimatum orangutan berarti ultimatum yang dimiliki orangutan. Dalam bahasa Inggris, judul ini mendeskripsikan seekor orangutan yang didefinisikan oleh ultimatumnya, judul ini dalam kedua bahasa. So, ultimatum orangutan means in Indonesian, orangutan's ultimatums. In English, it's a way to describe an orangutan defined by its ultimatums, the titles in both languages. And the clincher is, for me, orangutan is a compound word that comes from Indonesian. Orangutan means person or people of the forest in Indonesian. Utan means forest. Orang means person or people. Literally, I cannot describe this animal without also understanding that they're equal to us as people. They are people of the forest. And yet, I cannot think of a single quote unquote global campaign to save the rainforest and that mentions orangutans that positions indigenous peoples as equal to orangutans. We are dehumanized, right? We are completely dehumanized. There was a genocide of nearly 100,000 people that disabled, up to 500,000 people. And it was not reported on as a human tragedy, it was reported on as orangutan tragedy. Whereas we love orangutans, we call them people, we know what to do. And it's really frustrating for me. So I'm just gonna finish, if that's okay, by reading the poem an excerpt actually from the poem Ultimatum Orangutan. So I'm just gonna share the app that is on. Okay, preview so you can see. Ultimatum Orangutan. The original King Kong story was set on an island of Sumatra, perhaps Nias. So this is twisted phobia of what is now Indonesian man and fear of his usurping, of his big hairy hands on a blonde ingenue on the needle of white capitalism, the Empire State Building. I understand visual chimp language. I know what KK was trying to say in every edition of that film. Naomi Watts may not have understood, but for years, I was obsessed with the painting of a young brown child next to a monkey by abuser Gauguin, and have stared many hours at that monkey as stand-in for some kind of brown masculinity, cowed domestic speaking across the years, transcending forms of visual media, asking King Kong softly, what is this world we were drawn into? I'll tell you, small animal, a world where for decades, small children under a red and white sigil were lullabied. So, sidebar, in 1965 to 66, Western forces came together and funded and armed a genocide of suspected communists and leftists in Indonesia. In the 1960s, the largest feminist movement in the world was in Indonesia, until the women's movement was literally killed. It was a literal slaughter of feminists. And I grew up under that dictatorship where all of these terrible stories about women's rights activists were told to us, which were obviously lies. So I'll tell you, small animal, a world where for decades, small children under a red and white sigil were lullabied, women's rights and labor organizers were sadists, did unspeakable things, dancing sexily in their communist gear, killed the generals like animals. Instead of being told, generals organized a genocide of people suspected of communism, likely millions of people ended who were simply feared of usurping, remember the film, rounded up for no master other than bloodthirst, gentle artists among them who drew their last in 1965-66. Rewind, perhaps not no master. Ultimately, nobody's real uncle by the name of Sam sanctioned/planned all of this to open up lands with giant forklift hands, letting millions of bodies fall to the ground as it was all lifted into another country entirely. People's homes and cosmologies in rainforest, lifted and dropped into the laps of people who cannot pronounce us, and only the most powerful of those who can, who claim to be of us. I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit. When I speak to people about palm oil plantations, this devastation of Papuans, Dayak, Padang et al., invariably the words palm oil make them think of orangutans. We need to save them. I found myself thinking orangutans and so many peoples as well, but this phrase does not fit well on campaigns against palm oil. And whenever I see a billboard with an orangutan on it campaigning against palm oil, I say, yes, I say, is this what it takes? And always I say, and so many peoples as well. Gonna jump ahead to the last page of the poem. Oop. It is your, okay, a little bit before, it is yours, dear protesters in Merauke to Sabang. Tears when in courtrooms when witnessed by none. The earth is yours, glory humans, yours, my dear sayang, semuanya, all dear Lord, ya Tuhan, tanganmu, your hands, tanahmu, your earth, milikmu are yours. Setiap hari, each day, nafas, breath adalah doa is a prayer yang mengungkapkan, which conveys ultimatum kami semua persetan, ultimatum from all of us, damn it all, dari semua manusia yang muak dan bergelora dalam amarah, yang masih bisa tertawa antar sesama setiap saat, from all humans who are sick of it and are reveling in rage, who can still at any time laugh among ourselves, dan juga ultimatum dari semua yang mereka bakar, and also ultimata from all they burned, will burn, juga dari orang hutan, also from orangutans. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Oka. That was amazing. Our next speaker is Dr. Shereen Mack.
Thank you, Bianca. And thank you, Elizabeth Jane, for the invitation to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Cool. Okay, let's start with the poem. When petrified trees stand up and march into the sea, I carve out solitude to wander wide open shores, sand dunes, pebbles, and wooden limbs, submerged a forest of trees so tall they flew above the clouds. What we cannot control, we destroy and call it progress. We advance like the tide to claim what we have no right to claim. Concrete blocks, seaweed, dead seals emerge from frothy waves and maram grass. Unseasonal storms uproot ancient trees while man-made concrete lines remain intact, in place, in defense. Here, a legion of foreign bodies march to expand an empire, build a wall, then leave it to moss. Buzzing dragonflies, shrubs of wax myrtle, and the coconut vanilla scent of golden gorse. Someday, soon, all this will be gone. Gorse, grass, concrete wall, washed away like blood as the sea returns to the source, returns to where it belongs. There's a small hamlet, Low Hawksley, nestled behind sand dunes along a quiet stretch of sandy beach on the Northumberland coast. Here, along the high tide line, stumps of ancient forest are visible. It is believed the stumps were preserved by peat and sand and are believed to date back to more than 7,000 years and are the remains of Doggerland, an area of bogs, marshes, and forests that connected the British Isles to mainland Europe. Archaeologists have also uncovered animal footprints, and it is believed red deer, wild boar, and brown bears would have roamed ancient Doggerland forests. These petrified trees, they blew my mind. My name is Dr. Shereen Mack. I'm Creatrix, she who makes. My practice manifests through poetry, storytelling, image, and the own unfolding histories of Black people. I engage audiences around Black women's voices and bodies, Black feminism, grief and healing, nature, identity, and memory. I advocate for Black women's voices, facilitating national and international creative workshops and retreats in the landscape, encouraging and supporting women of their journey of remembrance back to their bodies and authentic selves. This journey is supported and recognized by Mother Nature. I'm the founder of Earth, Sea, Love, which is a social enterprise offering opportunities to people of the global majority living in the northeast of England to develop a deeper connection with/in nature. The Earth, Sea, Love podcast was developed out of these experiences and aims to change the narrative around who has a right to have a relationship with nature. I've recently been writing residence for Northumberland National Park Authority, a Black-led nature project, I will add. And at the moment, I'm Creatrix in residence for Hadrian's Wall, part of the 1900 Years Festival. My practice is a healing practice. It's the practice of slow, And this is how I engage with my work and the world. Living within white supremacy culture, we are indoctrinated into certain principles and practices which benefit the few rather than the many. Leaving aside racism and the systematic destruction of Black, Browns, and Indigenous peoples, white supremacy culture perpetuates the pursuit of perfectionism, product over process, and quantity over quality, to name but a few. This means that the majority of us live our lives at speed, with a greater sense of urgency, with feelings of never being or doing enough, resulting in reduced contact with ourselves, our intuition, and inner wisdom. Slowing down supports me on my journey back to self and ultimately self-love and healing. Being and walking with/in nature teaches me how to slow down and pay attention and just be. Nature shows me that there is an abundance rather than a scarcity. It is through these practices that I fell in love with nature. Nature and I are connected. We are one. Therefore, falling in love with nature, I fell in love with myself. This in turn means I turn up in life, in connection with others, not only as a better version of myself, but in a better place to offer love to others. Peat bogs grow slowly, accumulating around 0.5 to 1 millimeter of peat each year. As a result, many areas of UK peat bog has been accumulating gradually for as much as 10,000 years and can be up to 12 meters deep up here in Northumberland. Due to its slow accumulation, peat is often classified as a fossil fuel. Ancient landscapes made up of different time frames of vegetation decay. This can help to understand history, such as what crops were being grown in the area at certain times or what tree species were growing in the area, which helps to understand how settled the population was. Rich layers of accumulated wisdom providing evidence and acting like a sponge, slowly soaking up rainwater, reducing flood risk and producing quality filtered water in return. In Northumberland bogs, we have sphagnum moss, cotton grasses, bog orchard, and the carnivorous round-leaved sundew and the great sundew. And these in turn support a range of butterflies, dragonflies, and birds. Peat bogs create layers within the landscape, which can be read to learn about different time periods of the past and the present for action for the future. And they also create layers with the ecosystems they support and nourish, including us human beings. For me, it's all about our reconnection with nature and recognizing that we are one, that we are the same. One concept that I've been exploring within my past practice is invoking palimpsests, composite surfaces, sutured landscapes, seamed memories, and layered presence and absence. Palimpsest, a manuscript or piece of writing material on which later writing has been superimposed on top of the earlier writing, but there's still a show, a bleed through, a haunting of the past. A palimpsest landscape is to consider each successive episode of change in the landscape to be a different layer laid as a blanket across, above, and below the landscape surface. For example, within the bedrock, there are different layers of strata of organisms, vegetation, trees from different ages, or even, as I've mentioned with peatlands, the slow buildup of layers there. A palimpsest seascape, different layers of the ocean, the sunlight, midlight, twilight zones. That's in the physical sense, but also in the metaphorical and the mythological sense. Doggerland has been mentioned, submerged trees, but also I'm interested in my ancestors, the Black Atlantic. They say they jumped. Others say they were thrown. Pregnant African women bound for the Americas, cast overboard because of the lack of water or food or a storm coming, thrown overboard to claim the insurance on such cargo, property. They say they jumped. Better to seek freedom through death, better to jump and find a way back home across the ocean floor rather than endure another moment in captivity. Or maybe there's an underwater colony inhabited by the children of the pregnant slave women thrown overboard, which carries Black people into the future, where the generational trauma endured and the ocean deathscape is transformed into birthing a new way of being. And then the final palimpsest is us as human beings, our bodies. We live our lives experiencing so many different events, happenings, celebrations, traumas. Each experience leaves an impression of our minds, bodies, souls. Over time, memories are processed and changed and become narrated stories, while traumas are never processed and are stuck, stored in our bodies and psyches. I see our experiences, good and bad, being laid down inside our bodies and souls like the strata of the landscape, like peat bogs building up and upon each other. When my Black body is walking through the landscape, she's composed of all these layers, experience, traumas, griefs, and joys, mine and others, my ancestors, the past, the present, and the future. At certain points, be those weak points, at times of stress and pain, or pleasure points of joy, just like an outcrop through the landscape, or even a vertical sea stack or drainage of peatlands, there is an eruption of emotions through the hidden layers. Pure emotion from the depths, which is our core truth, escaping, birth out, to be in this moment, to be present. This is our essence, erupting through all those layers laid down over time and carrying a trace of each as it comes into form here and now. I think this is the aim of my creativity, of being a creatrix, to explore this essence, this eruption, this palimpsest. And to end on a poem, what the body remembers, a semi-found poem. Stop pushing me, fingerprints all over my back. I turn because the wind calls my name. Death stares from cracks and corners, blood, year after year, remnants of our presence on this land. They have time to watch the birds return to the trees, waiting for the storm, the plushy air of summer thunder. Here, it comes in the low lichen light. Like a ritual, they stare, quick glances sideways, dipped in ignorance, a needle threaded with thought. Ash upon their boots, they search my body, unwrapping and wrapping bundles of warped narratives. Across the border mires, only to see my lit face passing, whisper what I remember. I can not speak of it without feeling it's something found within the layers of a white flower. Thank you.
Thank you, Shereen. That was really powerful. We have a 5-minute comfort break after this, and I think I'll really need that after these two really powerful presentations. If anybody has any questions, please send them in the chat. Perhaps maybe the speakers want to have a little bit of a rest before getting into the questions at the end. I guess then maybe we can reconvene at 8 o'clock.
You don't have to like.
Hey, everybody. I hope you had a good break. So I think we can move on to our last speaker, Panteau. Panteau works with different media in order to imagine and share narratives that are less heard and less discussed. So she talks about everyday stuff, ecology, and more than human very deeply inspires her work. She has experience in performance arts, film, photography, and music. And more recently, she's been thinking and working through sound and gardening. So we'll have a much more multimedia perspective in this presentation. Panteau is also currently learning and socially engaged practice and community-based work by exploring possibilities brought about by listening. She's passionate about the environment, plants, and wetlands, of course. She's performed and exhibited works nationally and in the Netherlands, Belgium, India, Turkey, Scotland, and the UK. So Panteau, I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm quite excited to be here as well. And thank you so much for the invitation. I've been really inspired by everyone speaking. So I guess my presentation is going to be a bit relatively childlike. But yeah, so let me share my screen. Okay. So you can see my screen and hear me well? Okay, perfect. So this is a photo of me taken by a very dear friend and colleague, Kate Foster, with whom I've been sharing a collaborative conversation with peatlands ever since we've been to this place in the south of Edinburgh, Scotland, a place called Redmoss, where we spent a cold day in November 2018. So Kate was doing field drawings and I was doing field recordings. And I guess I'm still captured, by the way that this day opened up this collaborative space, but also the experience of understanding the detailed peatland surface and the mossy texture through listening. So I was born and raised in Tehran, Iran. I'm also currently in Tehran, a very bright place actually, where water can be quite scarce, not abundant. So I've grown up with a lot of shortage of water and electricity that is also dependent on the water partly, and a place where I guess the cultural ties with history and the land has been quite distorted, and a place where I feel I belong to, but also not belonging at the same time. So Tehran is surrounded by the mountains in the north, and in the lower right image, you see Damovan, the highest peak of the mountains, where it's also visible from my flat in Tehran, also a symbol of resistance. And this photo is taken from the other side, a big region in the north of Iran, surrounded by the Caspian Sea in the north, and these mountains, Alborz Mountains, in the south. So here you can find many different types of wetlands, peatlands, lagoons, and coastal marshes living side by side with the Hyrcanian forests and mountains. So it's a very special ecosystem. And this is a place where I got to spend the most magical time of my childhood in. I got to be immersed by the water in the air and in the land, and I got to hear a lot of special sounds, spend time with plants, dragonflies, frogs, and to me, this place has been the main connection for me with wetlands, without really knowing that they are called wetlands, which I'll get into in my presentation later. So actually, a while ago, I was talking to my mom about how this trip that in the wetlands that had such a prominent impact on me was great, and we were there for at least a few months. And my mom said, no, actually we were there just for less than a week. And so it always strikes me that how my understanding of time transformed so much as a kid, but also I guess influenced by the wetlands life. So my background comes from mathematics and then performance arts, and for so long I've been doing like technical jobs of video designing and light designing for performances. And there was this time where I realized there is this like kind of gap between my art practice and what's going on in the world, and like what is the role of my art, and what am I doing really as an artist in the world, in this world that is collapsing. And so actually for a while I did nothing, and to learn English, one of my friends told me about a one-year master program in Edinburgh that was called Art, Space and Nature. Yeah, so during the program in the beginning, I realized like the doubts that I had and my disappointment about doing arts, and also more widely even doing research, especially like Western ways of research, somehow it got intensified as it's sort of enclosed in a certain structure. And during this time, where we spent a lot of time in the same enclosed system of the art studios and galleries, try to figure out a way to connect with the environment, Kate, who I mentioned earlier, gave a presentation about her work with peatlands and her project Peat Cultures. And her first slide, I guess, if I'm not mistaken, was this one. She's also here, can correct me. But her first slide was this question that where this place remind you of? And for me, it reminded me of my childhood memories and the lands close to the mountains in north of Iran. But I was quite surprised, like, what is, these places. I didn't really know that they're called peatlands. So I was just curious to learn more, and that, especially at that time, my supervisor told me, oh, it's really good that you want to learn more about wetlands because you don't really have any in your country. Although we actually have more than 200 different types of wetlands all throughout Iran, and also the Ramsar, basically most of the categories based in the Ramsar Convention can be found in Iran, and also the Ramsar Convention, which is this intergovernmental treaty to protect wetlands globally, was signed in the 70s. In Ramsar, it's actually the region that I spent the magical time. So I got this big motivation to learn more, and at the time I was very interested about the plant Sandi, and we had a really nice little assignment for an environmental humanities course led by Michel Bassin, that we had to, through a very specific theme, we had to come to an understanding of a bigger issue. So, my program was super intense and short, so I thought I would choose Sandi as an opportunity to learn more about the peatlands ecosystem. And soon, I guess, this exploration became into this ongoing obsession that forms my process-based, yet non-linear context of working with peatlands and also connecting to different wetlands. So I wanted, through this mind mapping process, I wanted to know why Sandi has been researched, how it's been understood, and how do they live. And my final art project was actually going to different peatlands in Scotland to look for the Sandi and spend time with Sandi. So this is one of the places that I went with Kate, where she shared her childhood memories of the Curly Sound with me. And so I soon started to realize I'm making a lot of connections with different places and people and birds and species through Sandi. And I thought to pause here and listen to some of the field recordings of that day together, maybe for a minute. Is the sound coming through? Yeah. cut it like that. I can share it with you later in the chat. So this was in the summer 2019, which was my first encounter with Sandu. But I feel I must have certainly met Sandu in the north of Iran as a kid. So for me, and this is also going to time in a linear way. This is also an animation that I made with Kate about where we kind of celebrated the Peatlands research programs in Scotland during the quarantine. So I shared the link in the chat as well. So
turn off the video because your sound is coming a bit crappy.
Okay. Maybe I just stop my video?
Yeah, I think that's a bit better.
Yeah, maybe if it continues, maybe for a while you also should turn off your videos because the connection can be slow here. But do you hear me now?
Yeah, it's perfect now.
Okay, good. So you won't see me. Yeah, so for me, I was saying that this process is also a way of understanding my position and to understand, to explore the Sandu's subjectivity means to share my subjectivity with them and the importance of acknowledging and multiplying perspectives when doing arts and research. So I'm just going to read this. Wetlands have a halfway quality which gives them distinct attributes. From science, we learn that they own characteristics of both terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Perhaps wetlands are the type of nature humans find challenging to physically comprehend, as they bring about a lot of uncertainty from the moment you put your foot on the ground to when you attempt to line up a management plan. Interestingly, this resonates with my state of being, oscillating between continents. Not only is this about a state of geographical immigration, but also a constant translation of culture, language, and meaning of home and identity into different time scales. So as I returned to Iran, I looked for Sandu in the northern wetlands of Iran, where I got to learn more about the ecosystem and the cultural practices there. So I worked with local collectives, many of whom are actually indigenous, although today they can't and they don't identify as indigenous. And I got to learn more about abandons, which are the name of these wetlands. So they're classified abandons as man-made wetlands, but they have mixed and shared histories with natural wetlands. So basically, these wetlands are not categorized by the scientific classifications, but rather through the way that they are culturally managed. So abandon, ab means water, and bandon means the space or time of pausing. So it means where water pauses in space, but also flows through time. So abandon can be a combination of peatlands, coastal marshes, and wetlandy areas. So it's a very cultural meaning, and it's actually an ancient method of sustainable water management and irrigation system developed primarily for rice cultivation. So it's built around rice fields. So these places are maintained by Mira, which means the protector of water. But so basically what he does is to keep the abandon healthy and functioning, and as a way to, so it's also a collective way of managing, as a way to sustain life through working with sediments and balancing the water flow. And it's also a way of living for Mirabs, most of whom are indigenous people, but are chosen by the community and work together with other Mirabs of different regions. All Mirabs who are men are on the ground, supervised by local women who actually do all the work of rice cultivation and also creating spaces to navigate the wetlands through working with plants and especially weeds. So these places that are still run by this sort of cultural management and by local communities, they are the places that have been restored and maintained properly. So the local communities see their rights and identity as one with peatlands, and this is the bit that Oka was talking about, and I was quite inspired because they also see the people, the non-humans living there as their family, so they know the snakes and the tiger also as parts of their family. So I actually, write about all this, also as a way for me to continue my search for and the research about Sandu in this specific place, in this sort of non-linear creative writing, as also a proposal to define abandon and to bring together different ways of understanding and also exploring language for doing this kind of creative work. In this essay, which is called Sticky Minds, I can also share the link with you, which is published recently on Sonic Act's publication. So I'm quite worried about, what is going on currently, and the abandon's way of management are culturally shifting, and they're somehow assimilating into a more Western systematic approach. And because abandons are very cultural landscapes, with the culture dying, the wetlands die too. And they're mostly turning into fish pools, but also places for tourism. So ironically, they are being dried to provide roads and housing for people to go and see these wetlands. So I like to end by perhaps connecting this to the next presentation. I just saw Camila arrived. So I recently got to meet Sandu at the Chilean Pavilion in the Venice Biennale, and been honored to be a part of Venice Agreement. And I know a lot of faces because of this here, which I think Camila might probably talk about now. So the way I interpret it is that the agreement is a new way of putting together an agreement for protection of peatlands that acknowledge cultural aspects that are usually overlooked, and also so I think it's quite multi-layered. And also for me, it's like Sandu is taking me to a new place again, where I'm making connections with the lagoon, but also work as part of a program around the lagoon that celebrates the water life and other non-humans living in the lagoon as part of a program called Salty, Becoming Fresh in Salty Drops of Water. So it's also for me a way of living as an artist that is more aligned with my concerns and creative approach. And also being, again, Sandu is bringing me here as well to share this conversation. So thank you. Damitun Garam, this is a Persian word that we say that means warmth to your breath, which basically means thank you.
Thank you, Pantea. It's really nice also to see Camila has joined us. And then I'll do a short introduction and pass the floor over to her. Camila is a recent postdoc fellow of the Seedbox program at the Royal Institute of Art in Stockholm. She's a letter writing dancer who practices mundane magic, tells ancient circular stories, and is concerned with human and non-human health. Camila is the founding director and curator of the nomadic research program Ensayos, and her work with the program has been represented in exhibitions and performances all over the world. Ensayos brings together artists, scientists, lawyers, Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples to exercise collective, emergent forms of eco-cultural ethics. Peatlands are her passions, and Camila organized Turbatol Holtol, an experimental conservation device aimed at supporting the existing eco-cultural conservation efforts of the Patagonian peatlands. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Camila. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hi, faces that I don't know. Oh, such pretty faces. And hello, faces that I don't know. It's nice. Thank you for having your cameras on. Thank you. Hi, Kate. Community, yay. Excuse me for being just right on time for my lecture, coming from an urgent thing that came up, but I'm very honored and happy to be here with you. And thank you, Pantea, for introducing the topic. This is a relay of sisterhood. I can see that, at least from all of the cameras that are on. That's exciting. And a lot of my sisters ensayistas are here too. So I'm going to be talking on behalf of a whole mob, or a whole peat mob of people. And I will share my screen with you all. Let's see. Here we go. Turvatol holholtol. Just get it full screen here. So turvatol. Turva is peat or peatland in Spanish, and tol is heart. Holhol is peatland in Selknam. Selknam is the language of Selknam people, a community of people that have been roaming Tierra del Fuego for millennia, possibly 12,000 years. The peatlands tell us so. That's about how old the peatlands are known to be in Tierra del Fuego, when a core sample is pulled out and we see that thick sponginess of layer upon layer upon layer of life and culture succeeding itself. Holholtol is a poem. It's actually a peatland enchantment, which is right there. And you have the poet, the Selknam poet, her daughter, and an artist, Ariel Bustamante, who evoke and provoke this enchantment. This is actually the last picture of my presentation, so I'm beginning at the end, but it's circular, as Holholtol is, and time is, and peatlands are, again, that layer upon layer of stored information, ecological information, cultural information. I'm going to go full screen here too, and go back to the beginning. Oh, no, wait, close your eyes. Everyone, close your eyes. Help me so I can flip through all the pictures really quickly and get to the very beginning. Yes. Holholtol, a peatland enchantment. An enchantment, an incantation, a song, a way to speak, be with, and honor the peatlands. That's what Holholtol is. It's a poem that comes deep from within the land and water meeting in the Selknam cosmology. And it gave rise to the Chilean pavilion at the Venice Biennale that Panteau was just mentioning. And this is a pretty bold thing to have happen at a time when Chile is transforming and moving away from a constitution that was left by a dictator into a constitution that recognizes plurinationality, and that means that we are diverse and that we have many languages and that we have many also ecosystems. Chile is such a long country. There's desert in the north and some of the most integral peatlands on the planet in the far, far south. So to propose a peatland pavilion was something that required a body of work that came before it. And I want to tell you a little bit about that body of work that allowed for Holholtol, Selknam language, to begin to enchant the rest of the world, and hopefully your ears and eyes as you see these words. Selknam people are considered extinct. They are not recognized as a living community in Chile. Right now, they're not. And in many ways, peatlands, and these are Holholtol, this is the heartland, peatland of Tierra del Fuego, these deliciously healthy peatlands that have been somewhat protected because of their remoteness at the very tail end of this continent of Abya Yala. And as we all know, because we're all peatland people here, they have in part been protected because that is what peatlands do themselves. They store things, they protect memory and organic matter in that sort of pickled way that I love that RE-PEAT gifted us, talking about these pickled landscapes. And the peatlands of Tierra del Fuego, just like Selknam people, are urgently calling to be seen, recognized, valued, and known as well, so that its wisdom can infiltrate general consciousness and go from this little tiny island at the tail end of Abya Yala forth to spread the news, the Peatland Enchantment of the water, of the actual enormous amounts of water that are stored in these peatlands. And it's the poet Cecilia Vicuña from Chile who talks about how those wetlands are the hope for this planet that is all the more arid and drying. The peatlands of Tierra del Fuego began to burn some months ago. We were in the midst of our work in preparation for Venice, and this was a really heart-wrenching, literally soul-wrenching news because of how healthy these peatlands are. These are, maybe for those of you who are in Europe, you're more accustomed to dealing with peatlands in a quite degraded state, in need of being re-wetted. You talk more about restoration. We have the amazing possibility in Patagonia to talk about conservation, actually say these are peatlands that are healthy, intact, and in and of themselves managing very well. So all we have to do is just contemplate, love, and care for them from the sideline. We don't have to get in there and continue manipulating them to restore their health. But these fires become a threat to that amazing opportunity that we have as humans to practice non-invasive care. So when that started to happen, we all became very exasperated, and we have the history of colonialism there kind of looming as a way in which peatland culture was exterminated. Here's a picture of a Selknam house that, as you can see, has turf all over it. So peatlands or vegetal matter from the peat, the sphagnum moss, just creeps up onto the house and creates a living space. And that these cultures not only considered extinct, but that actually the very ecosystems that gave rise to them would maybe become extinct because of the fires, meant that we for a moment wanted to just shift all our gears, forget Venice, and put all of our effort into these fires. And it was made very clear to us by many of our local scientists, collaborators, ensayistas, that that's not what we needed to do. We needed to go ahead with Venice, and we needed to go ahead with this enchantment to make known that the responsibility for Patagonian peatlands is global. It's not just local. Because these peatlands are in Patagonia, but Patagonia is no one's. It is a planetary ecosystem. We all breathe and drink from it. And the Selknam community that does live there, so no, Selknam community is not extinct. The language is not dead. They are here. They are Joljoltol. They are the heart of this peatland. And Fernanda, who's on the left, Pantea, got to know very well. She was one of the strong voices in the editorial committee of this Venice Agreement that Pantea mentioned, that is a program that was designed to complement this device that we created in Venice, and that I'll show you some images of really quickly. But all of that, I wanted to, before that, show you how it is that these devices and these big ideas to go to Venice and sign agreements come about. And they come about through listening practices, through sitting with and being for the peatlands, sharing our stories and our understandings of our little bodies in the immensity of these landscapes, and how we might serve, how we might serve with the words, with the songs, and with the possibilities that emerge out of the strength of community. And so we bring into those conversations our technologies, our microphones, our recorders, and play, and begin to play, and begin to understand how we can amplify that experience that we have on and in the peatlands. Like this one. How can you flip yourself around, and how does your body become a technology to listen to and then project outward what the peatland is, does, and makes you feel wet and squishy? And how does that circulate? How do then that amplification that first you do with your own sensing body, then you do back to back with one other person, and slowly create waves of communities outward. And here I go back to that idea of the circle, right? And at this, that's one of the reasons why I love the RE-PEAT logo, because that circle is in there, right? The circularity of the waters, and symbolically, we humans have gathered around circles to do what we can continue to do, which is conjoin our hearts, our beating intentions for well-being. And out of that emerged this device in Venice. This was an early sketch of it. How could we bring people into the heart of the peatland and make them listen in the way that we had? This is what it ended up looking like. And here are just a couple of pictures. Maybe some of you will get to go to Venice and enter into what we call an airship that actually goes into the earth, but it goes through breath. So we move through breathing down into the peatlands to experience a kind of rebirth as we re-emerge. And what we re-emerge to is this: it's a field of sphagnum moss that is growing and alive and that needs to be tended to. So these cultures of care are what we are just, we're bound to do, to be carers, restorers, activators of getting to know landscapes that are far away from some, are home to others, but some, and this is a bigger discussion for many reasons, peatlands have gotten a bad rap, the language we know, the bog down, the hag, I saw Laura somewhere in there, all of these things that have made it so that peatlands don't have their deserved honor. And this is why I wanted to come to this picture, because this is in Venice, a group of official people from the ministry and the artists and the indigenous custodians, all honoring peatlands in very official spaces. And some of these spaces are not necessarily political per se, but artistic. But we got to have our amazing colleagues from Sami country too, beginning to build these solidarities around peatlands through this enchantment. And that just takes me to the Venice Agreement, which wanted, like I said, to look who's there, friends. I see a couple of you who are in this picture, so here we are again on wetland and women and these growing networks of people who know how to celebrate peatlands, because that's what you see in this picture, right? We are enjoying and doing ceremony to celebrate the work that so many people are doing on the ground locally. And this is the Ensayos website, and I invite you to peruse through it and get to know more about the work that we all do in Ensayos, but I want to end now with the Venice Agreement, because it is an open-ended agreement that is an invitation to all of you. We were 40 people who met in Venice, many of us in representation of larger or diverse communities, and 12 different nodes in different parts of the world also fed us with their own ideas and practices of how to value peatlands through different conservation efforts and the kinds of needs that we have on the ground when we're doing peatland work. So the Venice Agreement was 2 days of gaming and agreement technologies that finally led to the Venice Agreement, an actual declaration that is a poem and that is also a map, and that has many brilliant and grounded ideas of what are best practices for peatland work, what are actual needs that should receive support from other communities, and a little sense of who's who and where we were, where we are. So if you are now listening to me and you don't see yourself on here but want to be on here, yay, welcome. And I'll end with the peatland poem of the Venice Agreement. It's a collective poem that says, peatlands are power, yes, carbon engines, rivers of life, biodiversity, tickling, ticking, alive, murmuring, sensitive, sensual. Peatlands are memory, flowing and folding into deep, dark matter. They hold our future. Consistent connection through webs of roots, mosses, minerals, glacial retreats, organic synthesis, human life, and multi-species kinship. Peatlands are ancestors, one and indivisible, thumping like a beating heart, beating with yours and mine. The spongy wetlands underfoot drink from the heavens and breathe the beauty of color. Smell it? Yes. Respect the living dead peat. Include its language into your songs. We hold peatlands dear. Near and far we care because we walk the past that moves us to encourage healing. A gesture, a humble twirl of fate. Territorial rumors tell us that now we must sink into the cycles of regeneration, reparation, restoration. Peatlands are teachers, masters of rest, caretakers of water, libraries of climate evolution, of composition and decomposition. If they know, we may know. Intergenerational custody. The honor to serve invites you. Come, listen to the bog holler, a call from the origin future of life. Peatlands work with us, even if you are only a small portion of planetary landmass. And by that, I mean you out there. We all are a little piece of landmass. We are in service of your contributions. Aini. Mutuality, Hol Tol. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilla. That was a really lovely way, I think, to end all of these different talks. We can also now begin, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to speak up, raise your hands with the little reaction thing. And if not immediately, I can start off. I have a lot of questions. I don't think we have time for every single one of them, but we can start with one of the more general questions that a lot of the members of RE-PEAT had for the speakers. And this can be kind of answered by any one of the speakers because I think it applies to every one of you guys, especially after hearing your talks. And so, yeah, one of the first questions that we had was how creative media and this different form of speaking and presenting allows for breaking down this perceived and built up dichotomy that language creates and establishes between nature and humans and non-human nature and humans. Again, I think any of you guys could really answer this question, but yeah, feel free to speak up.
I think, if I may, that for previous presentation, the concept of nature is so fraught because a lot of the impositions of that word has been deeply colonial in terms of not respecting Indigenous understandings of how living things relate to each other, and instead creating this artificial barrier that is the concept of an Anthropocene that's like, oh, it's only 100 years ago since the Industrial Revolution, instead of like European colonization. And I really appreciated, Camilla, in your presentation talking about this genocide of people who were there for 8,000 years previous. Like these are ancestral understandings of nature that I think are deeply tied to linguistic diversity and are deeply tied to sensorial diversity. And what's exciting about gatherings like this one is that we are creating solidarities, we are showing diversities of cosmologies and phenomenologies and ontologies and sensories, sensorial understandings. So I think creative work has a way of cutting really to the heart of the matter by showing rather than telling, that things aren't binary, exploding Western understandings of how the world works.
Yeah, I was totally agree with that. And I was thinking of the Audre Lorde quote, the idea of like using the master's tools to dismantle the system. And for me, I'm at that point that I've just seen the system, my eyes have been unveiled in that sense. And it's unlearning that the language, that division, and I'm using my practice to try and find the words, because I've only got English as my language, and it's trying to find the words so there isn't that division and there isn't that that power dynamic either, so we have that connection, that extension, so it's a lot of remembering, remodeling, reconstructing, reconnecting, and it has to be done. It has to be done.
I would add to those beautiful words that in Spanish, remembering is recordar. And again, to invoke the Chilean poet Cecilia Vicuña, she unpacks the power of that word through a practice that is called palabrarma. So to look at the arm in that word that can go out there and do the work. And recordar is to restring, and cor is heart. So you need to move the words through the heart again so that they come out, with all of that, with all of that power of the heart. We know what it does for our own bodies, and what Xolxoltol also adds to that. It has the heart and the peatland. Is Xolxol is, in some Indigenous languages, when you repeat a word, it's to double its value, to really say tak, this is important, and it's been made known to me by Jimani Molina, the poet whose words Xolxoltol titled the work in Venice, that Xolxol isn't peat or peatland, because this idea that peat is different from peatland as a resource or something extractable, it's not part of that cosmology. So yeah, you don't divide up and say this is peat and this is the vegetable layer and then there's the water. All of those things are one.
I just wanted to briefly add what Camila said as a really beautiful example, is that, like with language, it's related to different ways of feeling and different ways of thinking as well. And like in Persian, the language that I speak, it's also similar, I think, in many languages, that there are not like binary pronouns. So there's not like a she and he and they. There's no there could be a difference between the living and the non-living, but then like the sun or the land or the wind is living. And I think also like this is also something I like to explore in my work, that through like bringing these different contexts of language, we also get to understand, to feel, like physically feel the land in different ways.
Thank you. That's really beautiful. I guess also this leads me to my next question about language again. I think Oka mentioned rights of Indigenous people and rights of the land. And throughout your presentations and your talks, I heard mentions of cultures of care, custody and responsibility of the land. So I was hoping maybe if you guys had anything to say as well about what you think this relationship is between this, on this one side we have rights, and on this other side, or perhaps they're on a spectrum or interchanging, we have cultures of care, responsibility, living together, loving. So yeah, maybe this is more a question for Oka or Sheree.
I'm listening to what you say, and being of Black, British, Afro-Caribbean descent, and coming to this island across the sea and roots in other places, my ancestors left the land to come to the urban setting here, and that was forgotten, their past lives. And there's the generations that have come back, come since, the second and third generations, that have instilled within the idea that we do not belong to the land, that we do not have a relationship with the land. And so for me, in the work I'm doing, to get to that point of recognizing that we are connected with the land, that the land has rights in itself, we almost have to go back and get to that point of experiencing being, as I say, with/in nature. And I'm using nature at this moment because, I've got to use this language at this moment, with the landscape, with the mountains, and that is just simply to walk the landscape, because there's so many barriers in place for us to not do that outwardly, but also internally, the fear, the reception that, we don't belong there. So that is the first step for us, because we cannot care and love and share and have that right with the land in that partnership until we develop that care and love for it. And that's why I'm saying we're going back to go forward, and to go forward into that point that we are custodials, and we are, stewards, and we are thinking about protecting and conserving the land. So it's almost, but we're almost a step or two behind. And that's frustrating. It's very frustrating. But that's it. We're working on it. We're working on it. And what happens within that journey, as I've said, it's my healing journey, is that we're doing that work on that internal person first and foremost. So then we are stepping out in the world, being our best version of ourselves. So we are sharing that vision of being connected with the landscape and being connected more to each other as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Sheree. What I'm hearing there is also a custodianship of the interior and a custodianship of self, and being a steward of self. And that's really gorgeous. I think, so again, as mentioned, I'm a disabled woman, and I try and frame environmental justice and disability justice as part of the same whole picture of healing that we're all trying to go on. So there's a difference between disability justice and disability rights. So I understand disability rights as sort of like the rights conferred by a nation state on its citizens, right? Like accessibility laws, for instance, right? Or going into the environment, like environmental laws that mean people don't get, infections from air pollution, et cetera, right? Although as a migrant in the UK, FYI, I have no access to public funds as a disabled person. So there's, rights for whom, right? disability justice is, and I'm just going to put in the chat because my colleague Talila Lewis very helpfully put up a definition of disability justice, a working definition of ableism that relates to disability justice on their blog. So disability justice is a term actually coined by a collective of queer Crips of color in North America called Sins Invalid. And disability justice is deliberately opposed to understandings of the world that are sort of white male understandings of disability, but also connect everything to, you know, anti-imperialism and anti-capitalism. And there are 10 principles of disability justice that you can Google online, and you can go to Sins Invalid's website and learn about that. And I think that oftentimes people work within the concept of rights, within legal frameworks, within the nation state, but justice, the concept of justice, needs to go way beyond that. The concept of justice is ancestral, is molecular, and understands the limitations of the structures and strictures that we're within. So yeah, I just put it in the chat for if you want to read her definition of ableism, and I'll also put a link to like the 10 principles of disability justice, but I think it's very relevant to environmental justice as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very insightful. Frankie also wanted to hear more about what a creatrix is, Shereen.
A creatrix, yeah, it's a term. It tries to, okay, there's labels that people have put on me, and it's maybe writer, artist, facilitator, teacher, and it's not good enough to be defined by others, and it's not expansive enough, just those one labels or terms. And I feel that when you have one of those labels, you're easy to put in a box and control. So creatrix, she who makes, is simply someone who makes, who creates, but it's more than just what you produce, it's also who you be. So in a practical sense, it means that I make things, but at the same time, I also make visible the creative process in the making. And it also is a case of like, sometimes I might not be making, I might just be being, and that's also part of being a creatrix. Don't know if that answers your question or not, but it's a self-definition. I mean, there's a whole book out there by Lucy H. Pierce, and I can put a link into it because that wasn't the first time that I found the label creatrix, but it was the first time that I saw a full book on it. So I'll share that link in the chat. But yeah, it's self-definition.
Yeah, beautiful. And that also links very closely to a question that Irene has.
Yeah, I apologies for my lack of camera flavor on my laptop. We've had a discussion a while back within RE-PEAT about art and activism, art and organizing, etc. And I think after such a warm yet powerful webinar that is so packed with various art forms, this is, I think, an interesting topic to touch on, because we talked about how art is often in activist spaces talked about as a means to an end. Art to convey a message, art to get people's attention, art to visualize and raise awareness. However, art is also just art as it is, right? Art is inherent to itself and is not only a means to an end. And I was just wondering if any of you have any reflections about the role of art in the context of environmental justice, peatlands in particular, perhaps, but I hope you know what I'm getting at and you have any thoughts that you would like to share.
That was a tough one.
I think I'll mention just one example, which is, so in South Kalimantan, there's like a purun artisans. So purun is a wild grass that grows on waterlogged peatlands, and artisans make items from it, like mats and bags and different things. And it reminded me of the fact that like the concept of art was also very much imposed as like art as separate from everyday spiritual life and community life is also a colonial Western imposition, right? Like, you know, like carvings on temples or making purun out of, you know, the grass in peatlands, like that is art too, right? And it's not a means to an end, it's actually part of the holistic relationship with the land. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think, again, you know, with the culture that we're living under, art's become a commodity, and that's taken it away from its true essence, in a sense, because you know what I said in my presentation, I see it as just it's how we express ourselves, and that is by any means necessary. And then to put that label of art on it is for me to commoditize it, or even to use it and abuse it to further your means, you know, when it's attached to political or celebration events, in the sense it's like a tag on sort of thing, and like, you know, let's do this art exhibition, say, as a means of maybe reaching a different audience, and not looking at it as a sense of like it's our whole being, in a sense. And that's you know, part of, you know, white supremacy culture, in the sense of like we suppress that our creativity, because it's seen as not any value. Well, it's, you know, it's what do you call it, put out like that, but it's because through our creativity we're actually independent thinkers, and if we're independent thinking, we wouldn't be putting up with the system that we're in, isn't it? So I do totally agree there with what Aka said about the idea of, like, again, it's just how we've got that division between art and everyday life. And that's why Creatrix really fits the bill for me.
Yeah, I would say that art is a life practice, and in being art as life and life as art, it's transformative and transforming, and that all of these labels that contain it or commoditize it, really reduce its potential it's sensual potential, our sensual potential as different bodies in the world. And that's why I think peatlands are teachers, because they're just, you know, it's all of it is. And I put in there in the chat a link to some of the rumors, the peatland rumors, which want to mobilize some of that sensuality of art as life, and therefore, and life is water, and water is peatlands, and therefore peatlands are art, and whoop, you know, and then we're back again into those spirals of non-divisionaries categories that make some things good, some things bad, some things beautiful, some things functional. Ciao.
So we are technically out of time, but I was wondering if you guys are okay with me asking another question. And if not, then we can close up today's session. I see no objections. And if if you want, yes, Svanche?
I would also only have one last question, so maybe I can suggest 2 more questions, and then would be very thankful.
Does everybody have 5 more minutes about? And if you need to leave, then just hop on out. Great. Well, if it's okay, I had a question directly related to what Camila had just said about Pete being a teacher, and then Svanche, maybe you can ask your question after. Well, yeah, you mentioned Pete acting as a teacher and in your talk, I saw you carrying out some type of scientific technological practice, but you said playing, which I thought was really interesting. So I was wondering maybe if you could elaborate more on this kind of practice that you guys were doing, listening, feeling, measuring in the Patagonia peatlands.
Yeah, playing, fun, sensing with and being for each other is really the ethical groundwork of what we do. So Ensayos, which is the name of our collective, and I might invite Carla or Denise, who are out there in the audience, ensayistas, to complement my answer to this question. But Ensayos translates in multiple ways as rehearsals, as attempts, as repetitions, and in that sense, a play as well, the performance of being alive and doing away with the idea of getting it wrong or right, but that everything is just a humble attempt at being in and with the joy of this, what do we call this that we're in? This matrix, this creatrix. And so what we do is we pool together all of the fun games that all of us who are there have ever played as children. We get taught as children to play, and that is wisdom that is passed on from mother to mother to mother to grandmother to daughter to niece to nephew and so forth. And so we give ourselves that opportunity to play again. Ensayar.
Thank you. Panteau, you can go ahead.
Okay. No, I was very amazed by your talks, and also the different approach somehow that they had towards the peatland topic that I learned to be very scientifically approached normally. And so I actually wanted to come to this heading of the meeting of women in wetlands. And for you all coming from different parts in the world, I wanted to ask you what the role of women in wetlands actually is for your specific places. Like, are they underrepresented, or are they bringing a new perspective to it? Or like, maybe you can just shortly say that.
Okay, so I'm in the northeast of England, and so Elizabeth Jane, I'm not sure you're based here, but from my experiences, and that's working out in Northumberland with Northumberland National Park, like the rangers that I've been in contact with and gone out with are women. And I'm putting white women there because there's no one that looks like me doing it, but they are women and they are doing it. And then there is the creative side with the Welcome Edition with Elizabeth Jane up here. So there's the scientific side, and I think the mixing with the creative. And as far as I don't know if it's because I'm seeking it out, but the leaders are women. And also within Teesside as well, which is below us, there's a research project going on there, which is led by a woman as well. So I would say we are in the forefront. But then at the events or talks or gatherings, who's doing the talking? I just put that out there.
Thanks, Sheree. I have a guess as to who's doing the talking. talking again about Minang culture, which Panteau, I can't wait to talk to you about the similarities and cultures who have tigers as part of our family. But we're actually the largest matrilineal culture in the world, and the women the stewards of the land are the women. We give the men like fancy titles like Duke of Emeralds, but I mean, come on. But actually, we are the people who traditionally, for many, 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 many years, continue to have stewardship, main stewardship over the land, ownership of the land. And I mean, to the point where it used to be that when you got married, the man would like visit your mother's home where you lived. Like he had visitation rights. But so I see at every turn attempts to sort of put into a box that role, that very intrinsic, essential role that we have into sort of like sustainable development goals, like gender mainstreaming, and it's like we have a lot to teach you, actually. So I think it's really also important to understand, like, there's so many Indigenous genders, a lot of which were hunted to extinction. I mentioned the genocide in 65-66 earlier that also included the genocide of Indigenous genders that are feminine. And I think it's, I really love this academic Maria Lugones, who talks about the coloniality of gender and the gender binary as being so colonial and how that has been imposed over everything. And I see that in how we interpret people in the past who, like, maybe they didn't identify as women, maybe they identified as some Indigenous gender. And again, speaking to linguistic diversity, like the diversity of perspectives we have here, I think that a diversity of what it means to be a woman and femininity is really important as well when it comes to peatland stewardship.
Yay!
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Oka. I almost don't want to end this conference. I still have a lot of questions, but maybe I'll just email you guys or something. Yeah, well, if nobody else has any more questions, I guess we have to wrap this up. Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank all of you guys again, and Dr. Elizabeth Jane, for organizing this and setting this up and finding these amazing speakers, and connecting with us and making this all happen. I learned a lot, and it was also nice to just hear again the stuff that I'm not necessarily taught of in school, or we don't bring it up enough in these academic Western institutions. So it was just really beautiful to hear and really needed as well. And it gives me a lot of energy and a lot of hope and a lot of love. So on the side of RE-PEAT, again, Irene mentioned it, Peat Fest is coming up and we're gearing up for this, where we will be highlighting a lot of these topics. Again, colonialism, Indigenous rights, the notions of rights, and how they relate to peatlands, our relationship to nature. And as well, a larger campaign of RE-PEAT will be starting as well. And again, perhaps Elizabeth Jane would also want to have a closing statement. And yeah, thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Just to say thank you so much. It's been wonderful, and the comments and the feedback and hearing you all, it's just such a rich conversation. So I hope we continue it after this event. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth Jane. Thank you,
Thank you, Elizabeth
Thank
Jane.
you.
Thank you.
Yes,
yes.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Hi, thank you so much.